In this video series, let's create this soldering station. This is going to be a great exercise for us to know and familiarize with Houdini environment and know what is and how to assign hotkeys and the uniqueness of working in Houdini and the specifics of it. In this first part, we're gonna create just a blockout and mostly talk about where can we find everything that we need in the next parts that coming up. But first, lots of techniques of where to find everything else and all of that. So first of all, what I did, I created front and back and side views for these soldering stations for our blockout mesh. So that's for us to import these pictures. What you can do is press D in a viewport, and there's an options for the background, front and left. You can see I have imported these pictures. And what I did is basically the bottom of the soldering station, I tried to align with the 0 axis inside the grid, both of them. You can do that with this parameter, image offset. And that's basically say that we are very pretty good with when we want to block out our mesh in front and left. So first of all, we can go inside our create menu and press on box, and just press it and make it in here. But one thing you will note that once you have created this box, there are a couple of things to make note of. So we have created it. You can see it's created a geometry node, and inside it, it's a box. But you can see that once we go inside this, our grid is actually changing. So outside this box, we have put it inside. It's not at the center of the grid. So you can see it's not at the center. It's a little bit offset. And once we go inside it, you can see that our grid starts right at the centroid of our object. So whatever the center of this object is going to be a center of our grid that we can manipulate and then do our geometry manipulation. So that's one thing to know, and you can see that our grid is actually going to jump around our picture. So what I would suggest you is just translate it to 0 and do any moving inside it, inside our geometry OBJ level, because then our grid is going to stay at the same place, and then we can just move it as you wish, and our geometry level is not going to move around. And so that's one thing. So first of all, let's delete it and let's do it again. So first of all, what you can do is actually to make it automatically at the center of the grid, you can just go to create and hold down Alt, press on it, and then press enter. You can see it's automatically going to give it 0.0 coordinates, and then we can just go inside and do our manipulation. What I like to do is actually go inside. Once we have selected, I actually enter nodes by clicking on either vertex, edge, or polygon selection. And for me, the quit to the OBJ level is a Q. So you can see it's basically this pattern. So object select mode. So what I like to do is W is move. So W is move, E is rotate, and R is scale. And then if I want to get another object, I just press Q. I'm outside my OBJ level. I can select any other object. So let's say we have two objects. What I like to do is, let's say I want to manipulate these, go outside, select these. I can then manipulate, select this, like that. So that's one thing. And another thing that you have to make note of is that there actually up here is you can create an object level or create in context. So what we are doing right now is creating it in object level. So that means, let's say we have this box, we go inside it. Let's say I want to create a box, sphere. So if we create it inside our object, inside network editor, it's going to create it inside this OBJ level, in this OBJ node. But let's say we do the same operation from the pie menu in a viewport. Let's create a sphere, put it inside here. You can see it's automatically going to create it on an OBJ level. So for the most part, I don't really like this. So what I always do is go inside here. You can assign a hotkey for it, create it in context. So now, once let's say we are on this OBJ level, I want to create the tube. I put tube. You can see it did not create another OBJ level, OBJ geometry node. It's just created inside this OBJ node. So in the geometry node. So that's very useful to know. So I think that's covered the most of it. Let's start with positioning this box. So you can hold down shift and expand it on both directions. So we don't really have to be all that precise. Something like this. This. So what I like to do is actually use the wireframe like that. That's good. Let's go to the side. Let's turn on wireframe on the side. Let's expand it like that. So this looks pretty good. See, it's not perfectly aligned for me for my picture. I just move it a little bit lower like that. So for the toggle of the wireframe, what I like to do is I have Alt E for no lines. I don't know what's it even called. I guess it's smooth shaded and smooth wire shaded. So that's a toggle. And the wireframe and the smooth shaded with the wire. This will be with Alt R. So you can get all of these options with just searching them. If you start writing wireframe, you can see it's for me it's Alt T. You can see that even here it's toggles. So Alt T and Alt R that I use most. Now let's take a look at many ways how can we separate pieces from this geometry. So I know that the front of it, this face is actually a separate piece. You see at the bottom of it a little bit. So this has to be a separate piece. The bottom and the back has to be a separate piece. And the top three faces also has to be a separate piece. So let's go through the many ways that we can separate pieces inside Houdini. One way we can do to keep this inside this object but separate these is just take this and put down extrude node. So in pull extrude, all we have to do is select output side, and let's say put down a division very small, like 0.001, like that. See, now we have separate pieces and they're basically at the same level, but when I double click on it, you can see it's separate pieces. So it won't work if its distance is 0. So if I put down pull extrude, do not output back on side, you can see it still equals as a one piece. You can see it's 1 point for each one of these selections. So you have to create a distance very small so that you can't really tell that it's separate. But once you double click it and move it around, you can see it's still a disconnected piece. So this is the way we can still stay in this geometry level. So for us to separate this piece in different level, what you can do is use in the modify, there's extract. So let's press on extract. You can see that while we are in the created context, nothing is going to happen. You can see nothing happens. So because this is actually we need to select the created object level. So once I press on extract, what it did, it's in OBJ level, it created another geometry, which is just the face that we just wanted to extract. But it's basically the object knowledge level with this node referencing and basically a group that we wanted to separate. So you can see that we can change the group inside here. It's going to basically extrude it and basically extract that face. So it is basically it's not really it's basically dependent of the geometry still being here for us our extract to still work, since it's referencing this OBJ level node. And another thing to note that we can actually, since this extract node, you can see it's actually referencing the node and not the object. Let's go back to our object. We can actually, after this pull extrude, we can actually select the face that we just selected and delete it. So you can see that this extract node is actually referencing the node, and since in our node we still have this face number 5, once we blast it, you can see we have basically separated inside different levels both of these faces like that. It's basically not referencing the OBJ level geometry, but just a node from this OBJ level. So you can see in this node we still have face number 5. Let's say we don't need it, we can just delete it. Once we have extracted it, we can just blast it, and that's it, like that. If you are using modeler, this feature is also called extract. So let's go inside modeler context and press on extract. So let's take a look what's going on. So you can see it's basically automatically going to set up also our blast node. So this is the difference between the extract of the default Houdini and the extract of this. So you can see it's basically going to create the blast node, so we do not have a duplicate geometry of the same faces on our extract. Another way we can extract some faces is just let's select these faces and use the duplicate tool. In modify, you can see there's a duplicate option, and make sure you have total number of 2, and you can uniformly scale them with the middle mouse button. You can how much you want to extrude, uniform scale them. Let's say we're happy with. Then without changing selection, you can just extrude them like that. Maybe something like this. Let's just add some divisions, maybe something like this, and then let's subdivide it. You see, since we have extruded it, it's followed the shape very nicely. If you are using also modeler, this kind of method is also described inside the documentation, but for this method it's actually there's a really awesome tool which called thickness tool. Let's select these faces. So now I'm in modeler context. So with Control D, it's still going to put down a copy node. But now we can actually use the thickness tool. So let's find it. So it's going to be thickness. So that's that, and you can see it's basically going to extrude them on the both directions like that. And what's cool about this, it actually has a group selection, because you might know that there's also a lab sticker node. But you can see this lab sticker node is very basic and it doesn't give us much of option, because let's put down a grid. So for the labs tool, it's actually the you can't actually, it's also does the both direction thing and all of that, but you can see there's actually no options for us to select any groups of it. So let's say we have these groups, and let's say we want to thicken also only these faces. In thicken tool there isn't really any option for us to select the group that we want to thicken. Even if we select these, let's put down a lab thicken node, you can see that you're going to thicken all of it. So that's why this is a lot nicer implementation for the thickness tool inside modeler. So you can offset it, scale it very nicely, thicken it, apply some divisions, and all with that you can see it's also available inside the viewport, so we don't have to even go there. So another way inside modeler for us to copy some faces is just selecting them. While inside your modeler context, you can just press Ctrl C and Ctrl V. You can see it's going to set up automatically merge node. You can see it basically stashed this selection as its own node. And in here we can just take these, bevel them like that, and then we are basically merging them together like that. So let's just select all of them like that. If you do not want to this is another way we can create some paneling effects, and this is just a different setup from the previous. And this is nice because we are actually getting the separate connection. So you can see that with this copy node, we're basically still at the same node like that. But with this method, we actually can select the original piece and the stash piece. We can do whatever we want with this one because we have selected only this one here. So there's some differences, and it really depends on the situation that you encounter. Another way we can separate geometry is use a split node. So let's just select some geometry. Let's put down split. So split node, as much you imagine, it basically give it a group, and it's going to give us two outputs for it. So let's put down null node and connect it to both ones. You can see on one we have our selection, another one we have rest of the object like that. So this is nice because we have different selection. It's kind of similar to the stash like that. Only in stash you can see it's still we have all geometry in the second one. But in here you can see we have completely separated these as separate pieces, and we don't have a duplicate for our this connection like that. So this is also available inside the modeler. I think it's called split something. So now in my modeler, it's called separate tool. You can see it does basically the same thing. It's going to put down a separate node, split node, and that's it. Now that we have taken our detour with the extraction options and the how can we duplicate our polygons, let's start with actually doing some modeling, and let's actually extract this face for our modeling. But before that, let's take a look at our model. We know that we have this kind of a beveling around these corners. So before we extrude any of these faces, we want this extrude to follow these faces. So what I'm going to do is actually select these top faces and start beveling it. So it doesn't have to be very subtle bevel, but it still has to be here. Maybe something like this. Now let's start separating these faces. Let's select these in modify, extract. So this is going to be our piece one. Let's go back to our main piece. So the front, select front. Let's extract it. Let's go back to our main piece. So it's going to be GO1. And let's select back and bottom and back. Let's extract it like that. So now that we have three faces, we can actually turn off display flag for our original. Let's call it the original. Like that. And these are going to be our extracted faces. So let's start maybe naming these things. So let's turn off visibility. So extract top. So this is going to be front. And this is going to be back and bottom, like that. So now we're gonna work with these three. So what's nice about this, so let's say we ever want to change the bevel for our front, we still have this original geometry that we can come back with and change the distance of it. And since this is basically just referencing these nodes, this node is referencing basically this bevel node, our extract actually is going to actually follow the curvature. You see the bevel is actually changing when we change our original geometry beveling. So this is kind of more of a procedural way to work with. In this case, we probably wouldn't really need it because the bevel is kind of a set in stone. We don't really need to change it all that much since we are basically modeling this object. But if, let's say, we want to be so sure, it's nice to have an option that we can always change this beveling. To align these nodes, what you can do is select all the nodes for Ctrl A or drag it out, and by holding down A, you can just select the very most top geometry node and drag down. Now that we have set up our PCs, let's start working on them individually. So first of all, let's start maybe with the top of it. So once I go inside, you can see all the rest of them disappears, but you can control if you want to see all of them, all the rest of them you want to see as a wire shaded mode. So you can see this is going to wire shade only the things that we are actually selected as a viewable object. So let's say I do not want to see the sides at all. So now there's no sides, I go in front of it. You can see I'm going to cycle only through those objects that has a visibility flag. So only through these two. So how can we set it up? You can see the only thing that changes is up here, show all objects, and ghost other objects. So for me the Alt Q is basically show and don't show any of them, and Alt W is basically cycling between three of them. So in a Houdini, so I really not sure where to find, because if you actually try to click on it, it doesn't really find you. So by default you can press on Control Shift and Alt and on buttons, and it's gonna show you in map key on hotkey manager, but this one doesn't show up, so I'm gonna just show you what's the name of them. So I'm gonna go in here and just, let's say I want to assign Alt Q. So for Alt Q, you can see it's called local world view context. So find it inside here and assign it for each axis. And another one is for me, it's Alt W, and that is the cycle view context. So these two hotkeys, set them up, and you're gonna have discard it, and you're gonna have a lot nicer time inside Houdini. Now that we know how can we isolate our objects, let's take a look at shading, because many times, let's say you want to match this bevel, you probably want to enter into wire shaded mode. So So there's a couple options for us by default in Houdini. So first of all, there is a couple of toggles for it in Houdini. So go inside select in hotkey manager and start writing toggle. So in toggles, let's find a viewport, geometry viewer. So they should be somewhere. So for me, it's Alt E and R. So what I can find, there's only two toggles for now for as a hotkey. So this is going to toggle shaded and wire over shaded and wireframe shaded. So these two toggles. So for me, what this does, so for Alt T, it's going to not show this. I'm not gonna show the wireframe, and the other one is basically a wireframe mode like that. And you can see that now it's flat shaded. So let's go to the smooth shaded. You can see if I toggle it, you can see it's still so basically you can either select, different kind of shading for it. Let's say I want to flat shade it, and our wireframe toggle is still going to toggle between the wireframe on and off. So for mostly you probably want to shade look for it like that. And the other one is the wireframe look. So as you can see that for the wireframe there's also two options. There's wireframe and wireframe ghost. So this is wireframe ghost, and it's not really very good with the for seeing through the pictures of it. You can see it's still very dark. It's not going through at all. It's basically ghosted you. So that's where comes the wireframe out. So now you can see we have true wireframe. We can select vertices and bevel them and whatever we want. So there's the two selections, but you can see that now my hotkey Alt R is basically switching between wireframe and wireframe ghost. So for me to get back this functionality, we have to go back to smoothed view, and now it's going to toggle between smoothed view and the wireframe ghosted mode. So that's how that works. But let's say we don't want to go up here every time. There is a hotkey for it. So by default in a view there is a standard. In standard there's a it's going to call, so I guess it's called view. It's called view radial menu. And in view there's a shading option. You can see we have basically all the options in here as a radial menu. So for me it's V. In shading you can see you can put down wired, wireframe ghosted like that. And if you want this our own radial menu that automatically opens up this one, what you can do is, let's just go to the smooth shaded. What you can do is actually create a new radial menu, and what you can do is, by editing current, we can just copy all of these values inside our new. We can copy all of these values, Control C, and then paste it inside our new radial menu. So then, and then assign a hotkey for our new radial menu, and it's going to give a shading right in front of it, so you don't have to go one on the bottom and select them. If you're using modeler, there is a couple of conveniences. So first of all, what you can do is, once you're inside modeler, there's also toggles for the wireframe and for showing the wireframe over the shaded geometry. So that would be very convenient. But what I like the most is that actually the toggle between wireframe and the shaded view is actually that it's actually wireframe is the wireframe and not the wireframe ghosted by default. So now by default it will be look nice, but in modeler it's going to toggle between them and very nicely. I can bevel it by looking at this geometry and much easier. So that's very cool. Another cool thing that I like is actually that the modeler case has a menu that's basically kind of a combined, both of these show all ghost and hide other objects and the shading of it inside one menu. So first of all, this is called the viewport. No, it's called the display menu in the modeler. You can assign a hotkey. For me, it's Alt Q. And so what we can do is very cool stuff. So first of all, there's still toggles for the wireframe. But what's cool about this, you can actually toggle also the other. So basically, once you decide in this top board, we can also wireframe the other objects that we are outside of this geo node. So we can toggle the wireframe for the other parts of this geometry. And we can also wire shade other parts of this you can't really see because you can see that it's basically showing also the wireframe of the shaded model. So basically two bottoms are basically between on the SOP level and the OBJ level. And on top of it, there's the same options as in here. So ghost others, hide others, and show all. And now let's actually do some modeling. So first of all, let's select all of these bottom edges and start beveling in them. So you can see in a reference, there's kind of a beveling around on both sides. So for me, it's not perfectly lined up. So let's just go by this one, something like this. And let's add quite a few divisions. Say 5 will be good enough. Like that. And let's actually start extruding. So let's select these and let's extrude. So let's extrude outwards. So find the handle. Let's go for this. You can press on middle mouse button and we can change the value later. So for me it's not super big. Something like this. Looks fine. So it is not very thick metal at all. So also output back like this so that we have a closed volume in it. So now let's start working on the front of it. Now let's start working with the front of the object. So there are a couple of things you have to know. What I did in composite view, I imported these pictures, and what I did is actually imported them as a, so let's go to the composite view, as a file, and it's as a frame sequence. So what you can do is actually in the Windows, what you can do is select all of your pictures and make sure that start is all the same, and then just print. So basically rename it one name, and then press enter. It's going to, and Windows automatically going to give its numbers from 1 to whatever how many pictures you have. And then once you show sequences as entry as 1, you can see Windows automatically gave numbers to it. And once you show sequences as 1 entry, you can double click on it, and you can see we have imported these as frame numbers. And then with arrow keys, you can cycle between them, between the pictures. So you can see that this metal is kind of like bent around. So let's do this effect. And now let's go to our front piece, and now let's select the bottom of the piece and press on extrude tool and press F. F is going to give us the handle, and then we can just move it inwards like that. So you can see it's kind of like extrude, only with the polygons that do not have any kind of thickness to it. You can see it's just a plane. But with F, we can basically toggle between transform, extend, front. So after that, something like this. Let's bevel it. Like that. And now for this, let's start extruding it. Just select all of this, also out back, like that. Now what we're do is, we just want to really worry about this side because we're gonna symmetrize it anyway. So let's select this one. Let's extrude a little bit. This is basically gonna give us the lip for the sides. So now we know that there's a little bit of space between these metals that's going to extend. So what I'm gonna do is just select everything but these two parts. So let's select these four, and let's extrude it again. So this is going to be fine. And with this selection being here, what I'm going to do is put on a scale 2. So for me it's R. And in scale 2, what I'm going to do is in a scale from 1, I'm going to put it to 0. Like that. So this is basically going to scale everything inside to the Z axis. So this is not all that convenient, I guess, if you would say that. So now we can move it. And with the move axis, with the move tool selected, you can see I don't even see the handle. Handle is basically at the center of this. Basically at the center of this object. I'm way down here. So for us not to move the handle, what we can do is either we can detach it or we can just use the middle mouse button. In middle mouse button, you can see if you have move tool, it's going to constrain on axis, X, Y, or Z. We can just, as long as we follow the grid, it's going to just move it on that axis. You can see it transforms into that one, like that. And now let's create this kind of a little bit of a part. So something like this. That looks cool, good enough. Something like that. So this looks fine. And we know that it's not perfectly, there's a little bit of a, it's not perfectly aligned. So let's just move this one also. So select this, move tool, and let's move it outside like that. So it's not totally perfect, some irregularities like that. If you have modeler, there's a really awesome tool for us to use. So let's move these around. Let's say I want to align all of these back with the very most back of these polygons. So let's go to the side, let's select all of them like this. And in modeler toolkit there's a flatten option, and all we really have to do is select the polygons, edges or whatever you want to flatten, and then you want to flatten to the left, press on it. You can see it's gonna put down a transform X automatically. It's gonna flatten to that place. So this is a really big advantage for the modeler. And in Houdini, I honestly think there's an easy way for us to flatten the polygons than I just showed. So if there is, I'm not aware of it. So, but in modeler, this is very nice. This is very nice radial menu for it. What's cool about this is actually sensitive for the viewport. So let's say I want to, just to try it out, let's say I want to also flatten these down, right? And you see, even so, for me right now is this place, you can see, but for me, if I rotate it, right is now there. You can see it's still right. It's basically based on a viewport position where you are. So right, left can be in different places, but it's still going to flatten on your viewport directions like that. So that's very cool tool. And now obviously we have to symmetrize it because we did all of our operation on one side. So for this, the best way for us to do is using the lab symmetrize node. So for me, I actually in the modeling I added as there's a mirror and lab symmetrize. So lab symmetrize is actually from the labs effects toolkit that is absolutely free for Houdini. It now even comes with the every install. You just have to enable it, install it. So lab symmetrize, put it down. So what I have done is basically create this couple of presets. So I know that I have to on x-axis move it. So in my preset, I'm gonna press on mirror x. You can see I have now mirrored x-axis in this side, and there's even a cool option like dissolve flat edges. But now I'm not going to use it. So because by default you kind of have to do the two operations. You have to mirror it. I mean, you have to clip it and then you have to mirror it. And actually, if you go inside the symmetrize node, you can see it's nothing more than just a clip node and then the mirror node also. So basically, it takes both of these options. Before it clips it, then mirrors it, then puts down the dissolve flat edges that it's also a different subnode, and switch, and that's it. So basically, it's combined clip and mirror node. Now that we have our basic shape of the front ready, what we want to do is, from the pictures we know that it's a little bit inside of this shape main parts too. So what we're going to do is go outside this OBJ level and move it. But you will notice one thing. So if we try to move it, you can see this happens. So this is because since we are using the references from OBJ merge, it actually won't allow us to move it. So let's turn off visibility for this and go to here, and we can easily move this box. And if we turn on this one, you can see that these references are all moving together with the original box like that. So let's move it back in. So what we have to do is actually freeze the transforms for the input geometry. So what I'm going to do is go in front. So let's select the front, go inside, and let's go to the very top of it. And in object methods, what we want to do is create a lock icon on it. So for me, it's a hotkey Alt F4, F8. So what we are basically doing, we are freezing this incoming geometry. So now, if you change the outgoing geometry there, it's not going to change. It basically has frozen everything that comes inside it. And this is like a standalone node right now. So you can even take this geometry and let's say delete it. So you can see our geometry is still here, even though we do not have this geometry for any of these extract pieces. You can see it says there's no poly bevel. So we have basically frozen our geometry, which for us is exactly what we want because we want to move this object. Now let's go back. Let's go back enough so that we still get back our first piece. And so in every front it's still frozen like that. And now what we can do is actually, let's turn off visibility for our original. Let's turn off for these, and for the front of it, let's move it. Let's move it inwards. So something like this. So you can see that our pivot is not at the center of our object. So what we can do, let's turn off visibility for these. Let's take a look how can we object pivot so that it moves with the object better. And also make sure that you have visibility flag on this one. So you can see that visibility flag is actually dependent on where you have this. So if I have in this geometry visibility flag is on this one, it's going to display it inside here. So the most common way for us to display the end result is to put out the output node. So in output node, it basically doesn't matter where we have visibility flag. Once we go outside this node, it's going to basically show always the end result of the output node like that. So this is basically in every Houdini node that has something in HDAs. It's a very common thing to do is put out output node at the very end of your whatever your network is. So let's just move it. And now let's do the bottom part. So first of all, let's select it, and we know that this part has to be behind our front. So let's just select these. Let's move them, and I want them to move them up until around here. Now let's bevel the back of it. So there's a very slight bevel, so something like this. So now what we want to do is probably give it some thickness. And now let's give it some thickness. So let's just select everything and let's put down a poly extrude. So in poly extrude, we do not want to distance, but we want to insert it. So insert it inwards, because this is basically for this, without the poly extrude, is basically the exact shape that we want. What we want to do is add thickness inwards. So let's go back to the poly extrude. And so it's nice for poly extrude that actually is not going to overlap any of these. So something like this. You can see if we wanted to extrude more, it would not overlap, and it's basically we could easily fuse them together. So, but for now we don't really need that much. Something like this, like that. So now can give some thickness, but for that, I know from the picture that I watched, there's actually a cutout inside here. So think about it as this cutout is going to theoretically give space for this front side panel. So let's just use the poly split node. Let's just after this part, let's just put it in here, press enter, and delete this one, and just move it like that. So that's that. Before we go any further with this bottom part, one thing I did notice that this bevel, so this very bevel that we did at very first, is not supposed to be this big. That I had like it, I don't know, I had like around this big, this bevel. So it does not have to be that big. So what I'm going to do is limit the bevel to something like this. And now what I did notice also that this back also has to be a different bevel amount. So what I'm going to do is actually copy this bevel amount. So go in here in distance. This is the bevel amount. Just press on. So this would be copy parameter Shift C. For me it's Shift C as a hotkey. Now let's go outside this and go on top of it. So you know that we have one bevel for all four bottom parts. We actually want to change that. So for the front of it, we still want to keep this bevel. So this is fine. So what we're going to do is reselect it. So in here, in the group selection, let's reselect only these two. So now, and let's just select the bottom of it, and let's bevel it a different amount. Now this bevel is always going to follow with the bevel that we are setting up on the bottom of it, like that. So this is exactly what we want. Now let's go back to this object. So first of all, what you can do is start extruding it. So let's go back to the very edit that we just made. So we did some extrusion inwards. Now actually let's give the geometry some volume. So let's just select everything and just extrude. Let's extrude outward so that our normals are not all weird like that. And you can see we're left off with this kind of a lip that we can extrude inwards. So what I'm actually going to do is select this, but I'm not going to select this one. So what we can do is let's select these. Let's leave this one. Let's go on top. Let's select this. Let's not select this one like that. And we really want to worry about one side of it. So since we're gonna mirror it anyway, so just make it right one time, and we don't have to worry about second one since it's mirroring. And then just extrude something like this. You can see we're gonna get some intersection, but that's okay. Go to the side, and now what we do is we can just select and move it, something like this. So we basically get this kind of a part where this metal has been kind of like that it's been like basically been bent for us to create this shape like that. And for the beveling, let's take a look. So on top of it, it still looks nice. For the beveling, let's take a look. There's going to be a problem with beveling. So this part we can really not bevel, but we can bevel up until probably also in here, something like this. We can definitely bevel. And now let's bevel it. Let's give it some nice amount of bevel like that. So now let's take a look at the result. So first of all, we're gonna have to little bit move it around. So, but for that, since now we're basically happy with our shape, let's just symmetrize it. Let's put down the lab symmetrize node. So now we want to symmetrize on X again. So mirror X. Now we have our symmetrized geometry. So first thing first, we want to, before the symmetrize, we want to actually move this one outwards. So let's just select everything inside here. Let's move it for the nicer effect for this kinda. So you know that you see we don't have any volume for this one, so because we actually forgot to put down the render flag, output flag. So it's for us too hard to see the end result. So let's put down output flag for our top part. Let's go back here and let's move it just enough so that we can see that it's basically this object is basically put together with parts like that. So let's take a look at this one. This looks pretty nice. So you can see that for this we can also maybe move it out inwards. So before the symmetrize on this edit node, let's select everything inside here. Let's put on visibility back in and let's just move it. And again, I'm using the middle mouse button to move it like that. So now this is more of a kind of a like looking like object that is made out of parts. So that's it for this part. In the second part, we're actually going to start to do some interesting stuff with creating knobs and all the switches and all of that. So see you next time. Take care.